Alright, now we're going to look at some specific functions instead of just like a made-up graph like what we had just a few minutes ago. So there's 5 of these, so you just need to sketch these off to have in your notes. The first one that you have here is your absolute value graph. It is always going to be V-shaped. Now I've marked, let's say about 7 points here on this graph. Actually, when we go to start doing the transformations and graphing them, we're just going to use 3 points. So like the 3 points that I'm going to concentrate on when we're doing the transformations are just going to be these 3. Okay. Next you have your quadratic graph, which is y equal x squared. It's always the bowl-shaped graph that's called your parabola. Again, I've got 5 points here, but again, we're just going to use these 3 when we actually do the transformations. Now, I want to point something out to you here. If you'll notice, these 3 points are in the same location as those 3 points, like the ordered pairs for those points are the same. So, not only do you need to know, like, these are the 3 points that I need to use every single time, but because these are the same as these, you have to know what shape to make out of them whenever you go to do the graphs. So absolute value is always V-shaped, quadratic's always the bowl-shaped graph. Okay, the next 2 that we're going to look at are these 2. The first one being your square root graph. Now, I only have 3 points marked on this one, so this will be the 3 points that we'll use each time. Of course, if you notice, I skipped over x equal 2 and x equal 3, which is no big deal. I mean, those values are on your graph. I just chose to use numbers in which I could easily take the square root of. Like square root of 0 is 0, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2. But I just didn't want you to think there was anything wrong with the 2 and the 3, because there's not. Now, your square root function, so it doesn't have an arrow at each end. So make sure that, when you're doing the graph, that one end has just an end point and the other end does have an arrow. Okay, next is your cubic function, which is y equal x cubed. Again, this is going to be the 3 points that we'll use whenever we are asked to graph our cubic function. Okay, last one that you need to know is going to be your cube root. Okay, so again, I only have 3 points that I have marked here. Now, I want you, this is the same thing I pointed out to you a while ago. Let me get them both on here. If you'll notice, the 3 points that I have here are exactly the same 3 points that I have here. So you got to know that when I'm asking you to graph the cubic function, when you connect these 3 points up, this is the graph that goes up and down, really steep. The cube root graph, this is the one, as it goes through those points, it turns and goes out left and right. So cube root's the one that stretches out left and right. The cubic function is the one that stretches up and down. So like I said, you're just going to have to know these 3 points, know what 3 points to use each time, and know what its general shape is. Okay, here's the first one that we're going to look at. Now you'll notice in the instructions it does tell you to list each transformation and then to graph it. Alright, so listing your transformations, and we're going to do this just like we did a while ago, but you do need to pay attention to the order, okay? So first of all, you look to see if it goes left or right. Now, this time I don't have the function notation, but the function that I have, this is the quadratic function because it's to the second power. So having the -1 inside the parentheses here included to that second power, this would be inside the function. So the minus inside the function tells you that you're going to go to the right one. Okay, now you notice I've got a 1/2 in front that's being multiplied times the function. So that's going to be either a stretch or a shrink, but it's a shrink because it's between 0 and 1. So you would say shrink by 1/2. All right, then you look to see if you have a reflection, which that would require a negative here or a negative here. Either a negative out front or a negative inside, and you don't have either one of those. Last would be the shift up or down, and having the -1 here at the end of the equation would indicate that your graph is going to go down 1. Okay, first thing that you need to do is look back. Let me pull it back here. You're going to look back at your quadratic function, and you've got to recall what 3 points that you need to use. So I'm fixing to put these 3 points on my graph, but I'm not going to connect them up. I'm not going to connect anything up until I have all my points or I have the points for the final graph. So first thing I've got to do is take these 3 points and shift each one of those to the right 1. Okay, so if I'm going to shift to the right 1, let's just start with this one. So of course that would shift to here. This point would shift to here. And this point would shift to here. But again, I'm not going to connect them up because that's still not my final answer. Now I've got to do the shrink by 1/2. Now, if you're going to list the points like I had mentioned a while ago, then you need to list the red ones. Okay? So whatever the previous points were, those are the ones that you would list. So this would be the point 0, 1, 1, 0, and 2, 1. So I need to multiply the y-coordinate, there's always the y-coordinate, times 1/2. So 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. 0 times 1/2 is still 0. And then 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. Now I need to plot these 3 points. Okay, so 0, 1/2. Of course, this point doesn't change, so I'll color over that. And then 2, 1/2. Okay, so I now have these 3 points here that I'm working with. And last, I've got to shift each one of those down. Okay, so remember that this is at 1/2. So if I've got to shift down, it's going to end up being at negative 1/2. And then this one comes down 1. And then this one comes down 1. So these 3 points will be the 3 points that are on my final graph. So we'll connect those up. Now remember, if it's quadratic, it's always that bowl-shaped graph. So you got to make sure you know what shape that you need to make with these particular points. Now I can change my colors here to kind of help keep track of what points belong together, because that's a lot of points when it's all finished for you to kind of keep up with. What I tell students that you might want to do, since you can't always just change colors when you have a pencil, if you wanted to start out, and use the closed-in dots, to indicate what you start with. But then if once you do one type of transformation, then the next time you might want to use 3 open circles. And the next time you might want to use, little asterisks. I mean, you're not going to need many shapes. You might need one other shape that you want to use. I don't know. Might use 3 little hearts. Whatever you want to do, if that helps you keep track of which points belong together. Okay, next one we're going to look at. Okay, so listing our transformations. This one, of course, is my square root function. And based on the fact that the plus 1 is underneath the square root function, that would kind of be the same thing as I've been saying, that it's in the function because it's underneath that square root. So the plus 1 actually tells you that your graph is going to shift to the left 1. Okay, now I've got a number in front multiplied, so that's going to be the stretch or the shrink, but this time this number is bigger than 1, and if you remember, the number multiplied bigger than 1 is referred to as a stretch. And that's actually the only 2 transformations that this graph has. Okay, so now we've got to get the 3 points. So this is the square root function. So you've got to know to start out with these 3 points. So 0, 0, 1, 1, and 4, 2. So I'm going to mark those. Okay, so first thing is to take those 3 points and shift each one of those to the left 1. Okay, now again, I'm not connecting those up because I still have to do my stretch. Okay, so just like I've done the other times, if you want to write down the points that you're going to do the stretch to, you can. Of course, it's the 3 orange points that I'm going to do the stretch to. So this is the point -1, 0, 0, 1, and this is at 3, 2. Okay, so it's the y coordinate that I'm going to multiply times 2. Well, this first point's not going to change because 0 times 2 is still 0. Now 1 times 2 is going to give me 2. And 2 times 2 is going to give me 4. Okay, so now I'm going to plot these 3 points. Alright, so -1, 0. That point's not going to change. And then 0, 2. And then 3, 4. Now remember, you got to keep up with which end is the end point and which end is the arrow. This is my end point. And then it keeps going in this direction forever. So this end needs to have the arrow, this end needs to have the end point.